Well, if you've had an opportunity to attend a couple of the previous sessions that I've done, what I'm going to share with you in the next minute might be a little bit of a repeat, but I'm completely sincere when I mention how thankful I am for the opportunity to be with you and to have the time today to cover one of the topics that's very much under that umbrella of human skills. And I think I say this at the beginning of most of my sessions that I've done here with the Microsoft Reactors program, and that's because I've had the opportunity now to focus on some of my favorite sessions. This growth mindset for professional success is one of those sessions. The content that we're going to be discussing today is, to me, it's very, very powerful and it's very, very real. As we go throughout the next 55 minutes, I'm going to encourage you to be interactive. I keep an eye on the chat window. I welcome both comments and questions, and I will be looking in the chat window for those. If I happen to miss one, please be persistent. And also, if you want to, feel free to come off mute and vocalize your question so we can hear it. But again, I really do encourage participation through these sessions. It makes them much more meaningful. And there will be a couple points in this session today where I'm going to force your participation, and you'll see that shortly. You can see on your screen some of what we're going to go over today. So I'm going to go ahead and jump on in. The concept of growth mindset, I'm going to assume that it isn't a brand new concept to you. But I'm going to assume that as we go through the content today that you will be seeing and hearing things that will put more of a focus and more of a framework around this concept of growth mindset. The quote that you see on your screen right now is fairly powerful from my opinion, because really it kind of starts painting this picture, if you will, of what we're going to talk about today. And that is that the problem that human beings face is that we aim is not that we aim too high and fail, but that we aim too low and succeed. And of course, that's a quote from Michelangelo, and the basis behind that quote is really to say to myself and to you that we have incredible potential. We have absolutely incredible potential that most of us, I'm going to say, we don't really realize that potential. So hopefully today you'll start to get a little bit more understanding about the potential that we have and how the mind plays an incredible role in obtaining that potential. To kind of further set up some of the topic today, I wanted to share a little bit of a background. This is kind of maybe by way of introduction. You know, if I go way back to my high school days when I was first kind of going through regular high school and trying to decide what I wanted to do in my career, what I wanted to do with my life, one thing that was very compelling to me was music. I played the trombone, I played the piano, and I told myself at a fairly young age that I wanted to have a career that would have something to do with music. And so when it came time to start going to university, I had applied for scholarships at a number of universities, and I was very happy and grateful to get a scholarship, a music education scholarship. So I went to university on a music education scholarship. Of course, I hadn't been to university before, and I certainly hadn't been to university on a scholarship. And what I didn't realize was that if you're on a scholarship like that, you are required to take a number of classes that perhaps you didn't think you'd have to take. So my first year at university, I was taking trombone choir, symphony, orchestra, marching band, music theory, music education, all these classes associated with music. And I mean, I love music. That's what I thought that I wanted to do. But about 6 months into my university education, I started to draw this conclusion that I guess I didn't really think that my future career was going to be in music. And I decided at some point that I was going to take a part-time job. I'm going to pause for just a moment. I see a comment in the comment window that you're not able to see any slides. If you can't see my slides, let me ask you to chime in on the chat window to confirm that, but I should be presenting my slides successfully right now. Okay, good, thank you. So I'm in 6 months in my university education, and I'm kind of making this decision. I'm going to take a part-time job, which I did with a company called IBM. And my part-time job at IBM was testing children's software. Most people don't realize that IBM ever dipped their toe in the water to write children's software for the PC. I did that for a few months, and then that led me to an opportunity to basically take a full-time job at a company called WordPerfect. And again, these are companies, WordPerfect especially is a company that's sold so old, most people don't even know or remember about it. But the point of the story is that I had a decision to make, and that decision was I going to continue in my scholarship with music education, or was I going to drop out of school and start working at this computer company full-time? And I had made the decision. It was a difficult decision, but I was going to drop out of school. I was going to give up my scholarship and go start working for this company called WordPerfect. And I remember at the time when I did that my mom and dad were so upset with me. They were almost ready to get in the car and drive down to where I was going to school and just really try to talk some sense into me. But I had gone through this process where I decided that I was going to stick to my guns, and I was going to stick with that decision to leave my music education scholarship and start working at WordPerfect. And then what's funny is that I worked at WordPerfect for 5 to 8 years, and then that opened up the door to some other tech companies. I ended up working at Microsoft for 22 years. I left Microsoft just about 2 years ago now. But I'll refer back to this story throughout our session today. But before I move on to the next slide, and by the way, I do see all the comments in the chat window for some of you that do remember the days when WordPerfect was the word processor and the only word processor, and also some of you that have that music background. But the last thing I'm going to mention, excuse me, about this story is what's incredibly just really appealing and exciting and just compelling to me. That's kind of my life journey. That's kind of at a very high level, the journey and the decisions that I made that brought me here today. Brought me here today in this session with you talking about growth mindset. And if we had time and we were to go listen to all of your stories, all of our stories are so incredibly rich and diverse, and they all brought us here today through these crazy, diverse, this multitude of choices that we've made in our lives, all bringing us here today to spend an hour together talking about growth mindset. And it's those choices that we make in our life that are so compelling and so interesting. And I want you to think about that. And yes, Lotus 123 is one of those programs along with WordPerfect. I want you to think about the choices that you've made in your life that have brought you to this point today and the complexity of those choices. And now as we kind of start to turn the corner a little bit, I'm going to share a couple more thoughts with you about this concept at a higher level around kind of growth mindset. And to do that, I'm going to introduce a challenge to you. I'm going to give you all about 5 minutes to draw a picture. And I'm going to ask that you draw this picture on a piece of paper, not on your computer, but on a piece of paper. And you can choose whether you want to draw a picture of the Eiffel Tower, the Taj Mahal, Mount Everest, or Stonehenge. And after I've given you about 5 minutes to draw that picture, we don't have enough time to have everybody share, but I'm going to call on a few of you randomly and have you share the picture that you've drawn. So I don't know that I'm going to give you the full 5 minutes, but let's go ahead and start that now. Again, choose one of those topics to draw a picture of and do it on a piece of paper with a pen or pencil. And I will come through here and ask some of you to share your pictures when we're done. So I'm going to go ahead and stop you right there. I'm laughing because I see that as I'm asking you to do this challenge, I see that there's an individual that left the chat, and perhaps he left the chat for the point I'm going to make right now. I'm not actually going to have you do the challenge. The whole reason that I gave you this challenge was just to kind of make you think about something. And here's one of those points where I'm going to ask you to use your chat window. On a scale of 1 to 10, I want you to tell me where, just type in a number, 1 through 10, where 1 would be this challenge and the thought of having to share your picture that you drew with everybody on this session was really terrifying and frustrating and something you did not want to do. And a 10 would be where you loved to draw, that was something that was fun and you were looking forward to it. Where are you on that scale of 1 to 10? And go ahead and type a number in the chat window. Awesome, thank you. I see a lot of different numbers. The lowest number I see is 1, and the highest number I see is 10. And so there are definitely a lot of different opinions on this challenge that I was going to ask you to do, or at least I wanted you to think about doing. Now, the reason I even presented this to you in the first place and then kind of pulled the rug out from under you without actually going through with it, it's just I wanted to make a point, and that point is when you think about the choices that you make in your life, when you think about where you're at and where you're going to be, one of the foundational elements of this whole topic of growth mindset is that growth occurs when you get out of your comfort zone. Growth typically does not occur when you stay in your comfort zone. And so, you know, the drawing a picture challenge was just an example. You face questions and decisions all the time that are much more real to life. And I would want you to think about, as I presented to you, 2 topics so far today. One is being very cognizant of the choices that you make in your life that determine where you go. And second of all, asking yourself, do those choices typically take you out of your comfort zone so that you're experiencing and doing and learning new things, or do they keep you in your comfort zone where you're doing things that you have done many, many times before? So one last concept that I'm going to share with you here before I really turn the corner and start sharing from a definition and subject matter content around growth mindset is just to kind of also help illustrate the power of the mind. So what you see on your screen right now, you see a picture, and I want you to tell me, and use the chat window again to do this, what is it that you see first in this picture? Did you see first the elderly man and woman? Or did you see first the musicians, the 3 smaller individuals, one playing a guitar, one in the background doorway? Which did you see first? I'll wait for just a couple more responses. I think the majority saw the elderly man and woman first, but there are a number of you that mentioned that you saw the smaller figures or the musicians in the background first. And I'm sure that some of you have probably seen TV shows or seen movies where they bring in experts and they do ink blot tests and they do these tests where you see something and you're supposed to identify, first of all, what it is that you saw, whether it's through an optical illusion or whether it's through an ink blot test. And the reason they do that is because that process starts to kind of develop and kind of advertise what your kind of mindset scope is. In this optical illusion that I just shared with you, the scientists would say that if you saw the old couple first, then you take a larger view of life and you do not get stuck on the trivialities, and you're always looking at life from a bird's eye point of view. If you saw the smaller individuals first, it's indicative that you have a great attention to detail and that you notice certain nuances when other people don't even know that they exist, and that you're the sort of person that is extremely good at planning things to the very last detail. Now, I see a comment in the window about some of these other tests, and they're all kind of painting this picture, if you will, about the mind, the choices that you make, whether you make choices that keep you in your comfort zone, get you out of your comfort zone, kind of the way that your mind thinks, and all that is leading us to kind of this introduction at a very high definition of this definition of what a mindset is. Now, before I actually give you the definition, I will, out of a very respectful diligence, mention to you that all the content that we're covering in this session today is really based on the research that has been conducted by Carol Dweck. Carol Dweck is the author and scientist behind the concept of growth mindset. There is just a ton of information that's available out there if you want to go looking for it. She has written books, but there's literally hundreds and hundreds of articles on this topic, all of which kind of try to put this session delivery around the topic of growth mindset. So if we pause now, we talked about mindset a little bit, we're going to pause now and And I'm actually going to cover what is a growth mindset. And at a definition level, the growth mindset is that there's this theory that your intelligence and your smarts is not set in stone. You can learn, you can grow regardless of where you might be with a certain aptitude on a topic. That's the growth mindset, and it's in direct contrast to people that have a fixed mindset. And a lot of times there's this kind of negative connotation around fixed mindset, and it is definitely where you want to move away from if you have that fixed mindset. But a fixed mindset is the opposite. The fixed mindset is basically, you know, it's the person that says, I'm no good at math. I've never been good at math. I never will be good at math, and you just don't try. It's in contrast to this. Whatever you want to put your mind to, you can learn, you can improve. You might not ever be the absolute authority and expert, but you can grow and you can make dramatic improvements. And those are kind of the two conflicting mindsets that we're going to spend the rest of our time today talking about: the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset. So as we think about the topic of mindsets, your mindset is an incredibly powerful element of your life. Your mindset can propel you to perform better, or your mindset can prevent you from fulfilling your potential. And to kind of illustrate this in a very lighthearted fashion, I want to share with you a quick story. A number of years ago, I took my family on vacation, and I took them to a location in the United States in the state of Arizona, and it was a city called Sedona. And Sedona is a beautiful desert town, and there's this river that runs through the city of Sedona, and this stretch of the river, on both sides of the river, there's these beautiful rock formations that kind of form these ledges on both sides of the river. And at this part of the river that we went to, there are all these places where you can jump off the ledge into the water. And it's usually pretty busy. There's always a lot of people that are there. It's not terribly high. You can see the picture there of one of those places where I went with my family. It was probably only 10 to 15 feet where you could jump off the ledge into the water, but there were just a whole bunch of people there. There were people on one side of the river taking turns jumping into the water, and on the other side of the river, there were just a whole bunch of people just sitting there watching people jump into the water. And so I went up there with two of my kids, and we stood in line, and it got to be our turn to jump. And my youngest son, Seth, was walked up to the edge, looked into the water for a moment, turned around, came back to me and said, Dad, I can't do it. I can't jump. I can't do this. I can't jump in the water. It's like, come on, Seth, you can do it. Come on, everybody else is doing it. You're seeing other people jump in the water. You can do this. Come on, you can do it. And so he went back to the ledge and looked in the water for a minute, and he turned back around and came back and said, nope, I can't do it. I'm not going to do it. I can't do it. And so as he was having this dialogue with me, his older sister, of about 2 years older, just said, well, I'll do it then. And she walked right past the both of us, and she just jumped into the water without really any hesitation at all. So my son watched his older sister jump into the water, and he turned to me and said, Dad, I can do this. And he then walked over to the edge and jumped right in the water. So that's kind of a lighthearted story to start to illustrate the concept of growth mindset. And the whole kind of concept here that I'm sharing with you, you know, around just mindset preventing you from doing something or propelling you to something. The point here is whether you think you can do it or whether you think you can't do it, you're basically right. Hold on one second. I'm looking in the chat window. Hi, Ben. Quick question related to your last lecture. Why did you say it was good to have a good personal brand, but not a strong personal brand? And what makes a strong personal brand? So I'll tell you what, David, I would be happy to answer that question, but I'm going to answer it at the end of the session. I'll invite you to stick around for a minute after the session is over, because if I answer that question right now, I'm going to lose my train of thought and get a little bit too far off topic here. But thank you. I appreciate the question. Kind of jumping back to that story that I just told with the mindset either preventing or propelling you to do something, it is true that whether you think you can do it or whether you think you can't do it, you're correct. And this whole cycle that we go through with regards to belief, actions, and results that just goes in this cycle. Appreciate the comments in the chat window. Keep them coming. There is an additional commentary now that I want to share with you as we dig a little bit deeper into this difference to compare the fixed mindset to the growth mindset. So one of the things around a fixed mindset that creates this barrier, this limitation, is basically a very strong desire to look smart, or stated otherwise, it's this fear of failure. And as I had a chance to talk to my son after that whole experience was over and asked him, what was the problem? Why were you so difficult to, why was it so difficult for you to jump in the water? And his answer to me was basically that he was terrified that he was going to make a mistake, that he was going to trip, or that he was going to do a belly flop, or that he'd hurt himself, and ultimately that he'd be embarrassed in front of all these people that were watching what was taking place. And it's really interesting because this fixed mindset, that is a huge issue with people that are living in this fixed mindset space, that they really have this strong desire, they've established themselves, and they have a very strong desire to maintain this image, and they really fear failure. And of course, the opposite of that is the growth mindset, which is to say, people with the growth mindset, it's not like they like failure, but it doesn't bother them. They actually have a certain level of anticipation and reward from going through failure because it helps them grow and it helps them learn. Now, I mentioned the author of this topic, Carol Dweck. She's done so many different studies on so many different subjects, and one of the things that she did a study on was children and test taking. And she connected them up to these brain scans and watched them take tests and watched them get the results of these tests. And what was interesting is that the children that typically had a fixed mindset, their brain activity really lit up when they received the results to their test. They were so excited and engaged on the process of getting their grade, and especially if it was a high grade or a good grade, that was really brain activity motivating to them. And that contrasted with this kind of students or the subjects that were more of a growth mindset. Their brains didn't light up as much when they got the grade. Their brains lit up much more when they learned of an answer that they got incorrect and then found out what the correct answer was. And their brains were just kind of living off this learning mechanism where failure was fine because it was a learning process. And so there's so many examples that Carol Dweck gives with all the research that she's done to highlight the difference between this fixed mindset and the growth mindset. But at a very high level, this is kind of a quick introduction to it. I'm going to dig a little bit deeper with you and give you some more examples here that contrast the fixed mindset to the growth mindset. And so kind of what's interesting here, I'll talk about challenge and effort. You can see that as the first and the third item on this chart that you're looking at. When faced with a challenge, somebody that has a fixed mindset will try to avoid the challenge. Somebody with the growth mindset will embrace the challenge. When faced with something that requires effort, the individual that has a fixed mindset sees it as kind of useless and worthless, but the individual that has a growth mindset sees something that requires effort as a way to master something. And I told you the story about my children. I'm going to tell you another quick story which hopefully better illustrates this in a light that may be more relevant to you and your career or the place that you're in your life right now. I do a lot of consulting. Not too long ago, I got a new client that was asking very, very specifically for some consulting based on a very specific experience that they had just had. And that experience was that they had recently been selected to a very prestigious committee. There was a council or a committee of about 10 people in their entire company, and it was very prestigious to be on this council. They had been selected to be on the council, and every month they had a company-wide meeting where the council would have anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes to share their insights and their recommendations that were based on the charter of this council. Well, on one of the upcoming company meetings, this client that I had been asked to give a 20 to 25 minute presentation, which was to introduce themselves and to present some findings that council had been working on. Well, the day of the company meeting arrived. My client that I was counseling got up very early because they wanted to make sure they were ready to go. They put some last finishing touches on the PowerPoint that they were going to use to share their concept. They did, a couple more run through of the presentation to make sure they were comfortable with it. And then they had to drive their child to school. And that was fine. There was plenty of time for them to get their child to school and get back to the house for the actual meeting. They got to the school, and as they were dropping their child off at school, they realized that they had made a horrible mistake. And it's kind of timely given that at least where I live a couple weeks ago, we went through this daylight savings change. And they had made a mistake and not realized that they were now an hour behind what they actually thought it was. And so they went rushing home. They rushed onto the call. They logged onto the call. They were about 15 minutes late. And when they logged into the call, there was another person that was already kind of a senior executive that was also on the call that was already talking and presenting to the company. And as my client got on the call, they kind of meekly and embarrassingly said, "Hey, I'm sorry, I'm here, I'm ready to go, I'm ready to present whenever you want me to." And this senior executive that was already presenting at that point said, "You know what? We're going to go ahead and just wait till next month at our next company meeting and have you present then, because I'm right in the middle of what I'm presenting and I don't want to have to stop right now. So sorry that you weren't able to join us on time today, but we'll catch up with you next month." So this person came to me, and the whole reason they came to me was because they wanted my help in gracefully getting off of the council. They felt that they had completely ruined their reputation. They were embarrassed. They felt that people were laughing at them. They did not want to be on that council anymore, and they wanted me to help them gracefully bow out of that council assignment. And so I worked with them for a bit, and my recommendation was basically to not get out of the council, to push forward, to work on recovering. It wasn't, a horrible mistake. It was a mistake that any of us could have made. There was growth opportunity, there was learning opportunity, there was advancement opportunity. But as I worked with them through the process, they were set in their decision. They wanted off the council, and that's why they had reached out to me, was to help them get off the council, and that's it. So I did. I helped them write a letter. I helped them get off the council. And then I ran into them a few months later, and I know that I'm probably spending a little bit too much time on this story, but I ran into them a couple months later, and of course, their comment to me at that point in time was how much they regretted getting off of the council, because there was all sorts of opportunity that they didn't realize that they were forfeiting by getting off that council. And after the fact, they had a lot of people come up to them and tell them, it's okay, it was an easy mistake to make. Any of us could have made it. And so I share this with you just as kind of an additional example of how the fixed mindset works versus the growth mindset. So you can look at the rest of the examples on your screen. You can see obstacles where the fixed mindset gives up easily. The growth mindset persists in the face of obstacles. One thing I'll call out that's just really, really important here as you think about what your mindset is, it's criticism. Gosh, in my career, I've worked with so many people where it is so difficult to accept or hear criticism. And yeah, that's a human kind of reaction. It's a human element where if we hear something that's critical to who we are or what we're doing, that human reaction kicks in and we're offensive and we cringe and it's difficult. But if you can develop a mindset around looking at criticism as a gift, that is incredibly powerful. And truly, feedback and criticism is a gift if you can hear it in the right light. And then the last thing I'll just mention here is with regards to other people's success. Somebody that has a growth mindset actually finds inspiration and learns from other people's success, as opposed to somebody that has a fixed mindset that they actually feel threatened or jealous by somebody else's success. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give you a number of examples, and I'm going to ask you to use the chat window. Simply type in fixed or growth to identify the example that I'm going to give you. So the first example is one becomes trapped in a world of success and failure. Would that be a fixed mindset or a growth mindset? Go ahead and type that word into the chat window really quick. I'll wait just for a moment for a couple people. And I guess if it's easier to type an F or a G, that's fine too. The answer is actually a fixed mindset. If you're trapped in a world of success and failure and just looking at, the success versus the failure versus what you're learning in the process. How about listening to opposing viewpoints Is that a fixed mindset or a growth mindset? Very good. I'm seeing most of you saying growth. The next one is one values the role of effort in an achievement. Again, I'm seeing a lot of growth answers, and that is correct. I'll move us along here. A couple more to go through. The next one that I'm going to give you is one blames others and dodges confrontation. Growth or fixed? All right, I am really appreciative of all the answers that I'm seeing in the chat window. That's awesome, and you are correct. That is fixed. There's a couple more here. One takes responsibility of his or her own actions. Would that be growth or fixed? Awesome. I'm going to give you one more. Last one I'll say here is just basically embracing change. One embraces change. Would that be a growth or a fixed mindset? And it is a growth mindset. So hopefully as we're going through this session today and I'm giving you stories and examples, you're really starting to see in your mind this clear distinction around the differences between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. So I'm going to kind of turn the page and share with you some additional examples of growth mindset to help you further kind of think about this and put this into context for you as you go about your day-to-day choices and decisions and the way that you react to all the things with which you encounter on a daily basis. So I think most of you might know the story. Okay, I'm pausing just for a moment for a question that I see. Is there any advantages or positive points in having a fixed mindset? You know, that's a great question. And I guess the quick and easy answer to that question is not really. I mean, if you have a fixed mindset, it's not like you're destined to fail. It's not like you're a bad person. It's not like you're, going to forever lose out on the promotion. There are some safe areas around having a fixed mindset, and there are some areas or roles that having a fixed mindset would be fine. What I found as I've gone through this subject and I've consulted with people, it's usually not just one or the other. There's lots of shades of gray in between a real powerful fixed mindset versus a real powerful growth mindset. So yeah, to your point there, maybe in accounting or compliance, there could be some areas where a fixed mindset might be advantageous, but I will tell you in the overwhelming majority of all the examples that I'm going to give you, and certainly from the author Carol Dweck, the whole reason why we talk about this is because we want to migrate from wherever you're at to more and more and more of a growth mindset. But that's an awesome question. Thank you for that question. The example that I was going to share really quick from a company standpoint was around Kodak. I don't know, some of you mentioned a few minutes ago that you remember what WordPerfect was. Well, if you remember what WordPerfect was, then you'll also remember Kodak in its heyday. Before we had digital cameras, people used film. And Kodak was the giant of the film industry. You had to buy film to put in your cameras, and once you took your 36 pictures or however much film was on that roll that you bought, you'd had to take it to Kodak to have it be developed. And Kodak made just boatloads of money off of selling and developing film. And at one point in this interesting history of picture taking, there was an employee and a department within Kodak that actually developed the first digital camera. And they brought their invention and their forward-thinking growth mindset digital camera to the executive board at Kodak, and they presented it to them. And the decision was made at the executive level at Kodak that they were so lucrative and making so much money on their film sales and film developing business that they did not want to introduce a product that would eat into that profitability. Yeah, maybe the digital camera will take off. Yes, maybe the digital camera will be important some point, but not today. And we don't want to sacrifice our revenue stream at this time. And so, of course, the history paints a very painful picture for Kodak in that they missed that, and they still exist. They still do have some products that they create, but they're just a very, very small shell of what they used to be. I already saw a comment in the chat window about Thomas Edison, who said, "I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work, and that's growth." So you do see the picture on the bottom right. That is Thomas Edison in conjunction with that comment that was just made. Thomas Edison actually had at least 1,000 light bulb prototypes that failed before he got to his successful light bulb that worked. And so, you know, these examples that you see on your screen, Walt Disney, before he was successful in launching and developing Disney as a company, he had multiple business failures, went bankrupt multiple times, had a potential employer tell him he was never going to be successful in his career because he just wasn't creative enough. J.K. Rowling, with regards to her Harry Potter franchise, before she published her first book, she writes in her autobiography about how she was penniless, she was a single parent, she was depressed, and all that was on the verge of her finally breaking through and persisting and becoming a successful author with the Harry Potter books. And most of you know the story about Blockbuster. I won't go into that right now, but all these are intended to give you examples of companies and individuals that had a very strong growth mindset, or some examples of those that had a very strong fixed mindset. So let me also kind of take this concept and just turn the corner just a little bit, which is to say, companies today are more and more and more looking for this growth mindset. And you will see that in the questions that you get asked in the interview process. Now, again, just kind of a quick point of reference, the author Carol Dweck, she had the opportunity to be a consultant with a ton of different companies, and she did some consulting works for some professional baseball companies, excuse me, some professional baseball teams. And she helped them develop a series of questions that they could ask to potential recruits. And one thing that she helped them ask was, to the potential recruit on the other side of the table, they would ask, so how did you get to be so good at baseball? And they would listen to the answers. And some of those individuals would say, well, I've just always been good at baseball. I was born with this athletic talent. I've always enjoyed baseball. I've always been really good at it. Other potential recruits, when asked, how did you get to be so good at baseball, said, you know, I've always liked baseball, but really it's something that I had to work at. My dad created a pitcher's mound and a backstop in my backyard. He set up a video camera, and every day I'd have to go swing at over 100 pitches every single day. And then my dad would sit down and watch the video with me to analyze where my swing could be improved. And it's been a long journey to get me to where I'm at today. So I'll ask you, if you were the professional baseball team and you had two candidates that you're considering bringing onto your team, both of similar talent, which is the one that you're going to hire? Another question that Carol Dweck helped them ask these potential recruits was, what is the biggest thing that you're going to have to do to, if we recruit you and bring you onto this professional baseball team, what's the biggest change that you're going to have to make? Some of the potential recruits said, well, you know, I guess I'm going to have to get used to playing in front of a bigger crowd, because man, these crowds and the fans at these games are much, much bigger than where I've been playing. Other potential recruits answered that question by saying, well, I think the biggest thing that I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to up my game. I mean, the bar is definitely raised. I'm going to have to work that much harder at bringing my game to the next level, and work even harder at getting to the next level. So again, if you're the recruiter, which one of those two candidates are you going to hire? Now, the way that you'll probably see this and, you know, be much more familiar with is you're sitting there across the table and your recruiter asks you, so tell me, what's one of your biggest weaknesses? Or tell me about a time that you failed. Those types of questions are being asked intentionally by recruiters because they want to see what is your type of mindset. How do you respond to obstacles and barriers and diversity? Are you, and to the question that was asked in the chat window a minute ago, are you resilient? How do you handle challenges? Those are the types of questions that are all focusing on the type of mindset that you have. And so one of the questions that was asked is resilience the same thing as having a growth mindset? I wouldn't say it's exactly the same thing, but it's really, really close. It's those individuals that are resilient, that can learn from failure, that pick themselves off, they're motivated just to move forward. Yes, that is very much a part of having a growth mindset. So yes. How does one start the journey from a fixed to a growth mindset? I'm going to ask you to hold on to that question for just a minute, because I'm going to answer that specifically in the last 5 minutes that we spend in the session today. So one of the comments made about mindset is getting rid of the ego is a good starting point. And yes, that's going back to that fear of failure and jealousy and looking at others people's success as a threat. That's all about ego. And if you can figure out how to get rid of that ego, that's very much a step in the right direction. So let's do this. I want you to contemplate for a moment where you're at on this growth mindset scale. And you don't have to type this into the chat window. That's not the intention here, but I just want you to think about it. Are you a 1, 2, 3, or 4? Based on everything that I've shared with you so far today, and the definitions and the stories and the examples, where are you, 1, 2, 3, or 4? And then if you think about that for a minute and you can tell yourself what you think you are, I will invite you. There are all sorts of really cool websites and resources that you can search. All you need to do is search for growth mindset questionnaire or growth mindset assessment, and it'll take you to all of these free online assessments where it will go through and ask you a series of questions, and then as you answer those questions, it will then indicate for you whether you're more of a fixed mindset or more of a growth mindset. So we're not going to do that in the session today, but I do want you to know that those sites are out there, and I would encourage you to go out there and take a look at it and see where you might be. You know, obviously answer the question for yourself before you take that assessment so you can do the comparison. But the point that I'll make either now or after the assessment is done, the goal here is to move wherever you're at, to move more and more and more into the growth mindset, as opposed to just saying, "Oh, I'm already a 4, so I don't need to improve," which is ironically kind of the definition of a fixed mindset. See another comment in the comment window that says, "Talent can take you so far. If you don't have the fire to improve on your talent, you won't get that far." Yeah, I appreciate the comments that you're making, because it indicates that you're seeing this really clearly for what I'm presenting to you. So, you know, we've kind of talked about growth mindset. We've given you this definition and examples of growth mindset. There's ways that you can go assess what your mindset is. All that kind of takes us to this question, which is around, do I need to change my mindset? And that's really a very personal question that you need to ask yourself. But to help you answer that question, I'll pose to you some additional thoughts. You know, think it's really helpful as you're trying to answer the question, do you need to change your mindset? It's usually really helpful to think of a specific challenge or a conflict that you're facing in your life right now. And it can be at work, it can be at home. Some of the examples that you see on your screen are just that, something to jog your thought process, to think of a challenge or a conflict that you're dealing with right now. And you're doing this because you're going to use this to start to try to answer the question about whether you think you need to change your mindset. Question in the chat window says, how do you start to change your fixed mindset? And again, I'll get to that in just a minute. So I'm sorry, I pushed you off twice on that now. So give me just 1 minute and I'll get there. You know, the example that you see on my screen, the first bullet point says, I got a bad performance evaluation that I don't think I deserved. I've spent 25 years in my career managing direct reports or managing managers, and I have sat in a lot of conversations with people that were in this scenario where they were getting a performance evaluation that they didn't think they deserved. And the other side of that coin is to tell you that I personally have sat in review processes where I didn't think I was getting the review that I deserved. And it's a very human reaction to kind of be offended, and you know, there's monetary rewards and consequences associated with that. So it's not something that's simple. But if you think about this specific challenge or conflict that I'm asking you to, that's a perfect example for me, because I've seen it from both sides of that coin. And it's very, very easy to get stuck in this place where this is unfair, you know, what a joke, that I got a raw deal. And if you find yourself really fixating on that element, then it could indicate that you you have an opportunity to change to more of a growth mindset, because somebody that's in that situation that has a really strong growth mindset will look and primarily look for the opportunity to understand where their areas for improvement are, as opposed to just identifying the areas where they think they got a raw deal. Now, I know that's a very oversimplification of the topic, and we don't have a lot of time. When we go through this session in the full month-long course that I do, where there's 4 workshops and 8 hours of workshops, we get a chance to really dig into this deep. And one of the homework assignments that you have is to come up with a specific example that we then build a whole plan around to identify where you're at and how to improve it. So I'm just kind of sharing what I think are some of the high-level powerful points today in our 1-hour session that hopefully get you thinking about this. And I'll say this now, and I'll say it again at the very end. I would invite you to reach out to me if you want to know more information and take this whole conversation to the next step. I'm on LinkedIn. Please feel free to search me, reach out to me, and I'm happy to correspond with you further to take this conversation further. So when you're kind of looking at this challenge that you're dealing with and trying to understand whether you have a growth mindset or a fixed mindset, or do you need to change, think about some of these questions. Does the other person have a fixed mindset about the issue? Do you go through and actually make a list, an actual documented list around the areas where you might have a fixed mindset, and then ask yourself, how is it impacting your communication and relationship with the other person? There's so many of these examples that are not work related, they're personal related as well, with your spouse or with your son or your daughter or a friend. And it's just really interesting to go through. One of the things I love about doing that full month-long workshop is that we get to dig into all the specific examples to really analyze a lot of where people think they are or where they think they need to improve. So we're kind of coming down the home stretch. We've only got about 9 minutes left. So I want to kind of turn the corner here and kind of answer the question, can a mindset be changed? And of course, the good news is it can. We wouldn't be talking today. I wouldn't be delivering this session if it couldn't. There are some simple steps that you can take to help understand and start changing that mindset. And the first one is what I refer to as learning to hear your fixed mindset voice. Now, I will tell you that every person, even the most powerful growth mindset people in the world, every single human being has this inner saboteur. It's this voice inside your head that says, you can't jump off that ledge into the water below. You'll embarrass yourself in front of all those people that are sitting there on the other side of the river. You can't change your music education scholarship. You committed to that thing and you'll be giving up a lot of money. You can't do that. That inner saboteur is in all of you, and you need to learn how to hear it. And then after you've had a chance to actually hear it, after you've gone through the process of learning how to hear it, you need to be able to understand the process of making choices relative to that voice. You always have a choice. There are always choices that you can make, and you have to recognize that you have those choices and you have to make the right choices. And I know I'm kind of rushing through this a little bit quickly. I'm just doing that in the interest of time. And the other thing that is really helpful and powerful is to actually have a dialogue with that inner voice that you have. And I mean really a dialogue. Stand in front of a mirror or have a vocal dialogue with that inner voice. There are all sorts of areas that conversation can go. You can learn to hear the fixed mindset voice, and you can then work diligently and deliberately to replace it with the growth mindset choice. And I know most of you probably have not had a vocal conversation like that before with yourself, and it might sound a little bit strange, but I strongly encourage you to do it. There is a ton of understanding and progress that you can make if you take the time to actually vocalize that conversation. So what I'm going to do is I've got a couple last things I want to share with you. And I realize, it's funny, I've received some feedback as I go through these sessions that a lot of the stories that I tell, they're demographic or geographically based. And I acknowledge that. That's part of kind of my upbringing and my background, but I want to show you a quick little video clip. It's funny because just a minute ago somebody was asking about, is resilience the same thing as growth mindset? Just a quick little, like 1-minute video clip about Michael Jordan. And for those of you that don't know Michael Jordan, he was a very, very, very famous professional basketball player in the NBA. And most people, when they hear the name Michael Jordan, they just immediately associate his name with incredible talent and basketball playing ability, but they don't really take into consideration the journey that he took to get him to where he was, to the point where everybody saw him that way. So bear with me just one moment as I switch over to share this little video clip. It's only about a minute long, and after the video is over, then I'll be coming right back with my PowerPoint presentation. And here it is.
I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I've failed over and over and over again in my life. And that is why I succeed.
Good! The game's over and the Bulls have won.
Bear with me just 1 second as I get my PowerPoint back on the screen. I have to say, while I'm doing that, it's funny. I use that example. I talked in the story that I've shared with you about going on a scholarship. I went to Brigham Young University, which is in the state of Utah, and they have a professional basketball team called the Utah Jazz. And I lived in the state of Utah for about 8 years, and every single year it seemed they would lose to Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls. And so at the time I hated Michael Jordan, I hated the Chicago Bulls, but it really helps tell my story right now. And so as I'm wrapping up here, I just want to kind of go back to a couple thoughts, which is to, I shared the story at the beginning of how I thought I was going to go into the music education business, and then I made a series of choices in my life that brought me here today with you. And I don't mean to belabor the point, but this whole idea of the choices that we make and whether we have a fixed mindset or a growth mindset is very powerful to me to think about the journey that I've had to bring me here today, where I'm meeting with you, but even more powerful to think about where I'm going to be in 1 year, in 2 years, in 10 years, because of my mindset and the choices that I make. And I would just encourage you, as I do with all of these human skills sessions that I teach, I would strongly encourage you to think about that and think about, deliberately working on improving your mindset. And the last point that I would make is just, the comment was, or the point was, yes, you can change your mindset, and there's steps that you go through to do it. And the last step is to just do it. You go through that process and then make up your mind and take that step. And I promise you, I've experienced it in my personal life so many times, and especially in the last year. If you go about that diligently, it will pay dividends, and you will be rewarded by taking the growth mindset approach versus the fixed mindset approach. So again, if you have additional questions that you want to ask, please look me up on LinkedIn. I'm happy to respond. And I'm seeing a couple of you type in the chat window, "Just do it," which is also one of the slogans of Michael Jordan and Nike, I believe. So thank you again very much for being here today in the session. I'm going to go ahead and turn the time back over to my Microsoft Reactors host. Thank you very much.